In a stunning and unprecedented move, Japan has abruptly halted all trade with the United States, sending shockwaves through the corridors of power and commerce around the globe. The world is watching as two of the largest economies, once close allies and trading partners, now stand on opposite sides of a deepening divide. Ships sit idle in harbors, containers are stacked and waiting, and the familiar flow of goods between these nations has come to a sudden grinding halt. The impact is immediate and severe, shaking the global economy to its very core. Stock markets from Tokyo to New York are in freefall, with investors scrambling to make sense of the chaos. The interconnected nature of today's financial systems means that a disruption of this magnitude doesn't just affect the US and Japan. It ripples outward, touching every corner of the world. This dramatic decision by Japan is a direct response to President Trump's aggressive and controversial tariff policies, which many saw as a challenge to the spirit of cooperation that has defined US-Japan relations for decades. The rupture marks not just a political disagreement, but a fundamental break in a partnership that has shaped the post-war global order. The handshake between American and Japanese business leaders, once a symbol of trust, is now broken. But this crisis is far more than a simple trade dispute. It's a test of the international order itself, and of the rules that have governed global commerce for generations. As world leaders gather in emergency meetings at the United Nations, the G20, and the World Trade Organization, the absence of the US and Japan at the table is a stark reminder of just how fragile these alliances can be. Japan's bold and defiant stand signals the end of an era in which American economic pressure often went unchallenged. Across Japan, citizens rally in support of their government's decision while business leaders brace for the uncertainty ahead. Editorials declare the end of American dominance in trade negotiations, and a new sense of national resolve takes hold in Tokyo. As supply chains freeze, factories slow to a crawl, and store shelves begin to empty, the world holds its breath. Markets tumble, and anxious investors watch as fortunes are made and lost in moments. The question on everyone's mind: can this once strong alliance be salvaged, or are we witnessing the dawn of a new era of confrontation and uncertainty? The stakes could not be higher. The consequences of this standoff will be felt in every aspect of daily life, from the prices consumers pay at the supermarket to the stability of global power structures. Energy markets, currency exchanges, and even the world's power grids are being tested as leaders scramble to respond to the crisis. In this series, we'll take a closer look at how we arrived at this historic breaking point. We'll examine the key events, the pivotal decisions, and the influential figures who shaped the US-Japan relationship over the years, tracing the path from cooperation to confrontation. And we'll ask the most pressing question of all: what does the future hold for these two nations, and for a world now teetering on the edge of a new and uncertain era? The US-Japan economic relationship has always been complex, marked by partnership, rivalry, and recurring conflict. After World War II, the US rebuilt Japan, fostering an alliance that fueled Japan's rise as a manufacturing powerhouse. By the 1970s and 80s, Japan's export boom triggered fierce trade wars and American fears of industrial decline. The Plaza Accord and Japan's subsequent economic stagnation set the stage for a more balanced, if uneasy, partnership. Trump's election reignited old tensions as his administration revived protectionist tactics and abandoned multilateral agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Years of unpredictable tariffs eroded trust, paving the way for today's dramatic standoff. The current crisis erupted after Trump's 2025 tariffs on Japanese goods, targeting everything from cars to robotics. The Tokyo Stock Exchange plunged, exposing Japan's vulnerability to US economic pressure. Diplomatic talks failed, as the White House demanded concessions Japan found unacceptable. The situation worsened when the EU halted its own US trade deal in response to Trump's threats, emboldening Japan. Inspired by Europe's defiance, Japanese leaders decided negotiation was futile. The result? A historic calculated break with the US, signaling Japan's refusal to yield to American demands. The world's economic order was suddenly upended. The stage was set for a full-blown trade war. In a nationally televised address watched by millions across the country, Japan's Prime Minister took to the airwaves with a message that would reverberate around the world. With a calm but resolute tone, he announced an immediate and total suspension of all trade with the United States, effective at midnight. The Prime Minister's words were clear and uncompromising, signaling a dramatic escalation in the ongoing economic standoff between the two nations. The announcement was broadcast live, with news anchors providing real-time analysis and citizens gathering in homes, offices, and public spaces to witness the historic declaration. The halt, he explained, would remain in place until the US government reversed its recently imposed punitive tariffs on Japanese goods. This was not a decision made lightly, but one born out of necessity, as months of negotiations had failed to yield any progress. The Prime Minister emphasized that Japan would not be coerced by economic pressure, and that the nation's dignity and economic sovereignty were at stake. This was no symbolic gesture. Ports, airlines, and logistics companies were ordered to stop all shipments, both imports and exports, with immediate effect. Across the country, the impact was visible within hours. Cargo ships sat idle in harbors, shipping containers stacked up at major ports, and airplanes remained grounded on tarmacs. The usually bustling logistics hubs fell eerily silent as workers awaited further instructions. The government, anticipating the economic shockwaves, quickly rolled out emergency support measures for affected industries. Special funds were allocated to help businesses weather the sudden disruption, and officials convened around the clock to monitor the situation. Factory owners, exporters, and workers braced for the economic pain that was sure to follow, knowing that the coming weeks would test their resilience. Months of intense internal debate had led to this moment. Behind closed doors, business leaders and politicians weighed the risks and consequence, ultimately uniting behind a hardline stance. The decision was not without controversy, but a consensus emerged. Japan would stand firm, even if it meant short-term hardship, to defend its long-term interests and principles. Public reaction in Japan was swift and deeply emotional. On the streets of Tokyo and in towns across the nation, citizens expressed a mix of anxiety, uncertainty, and pride. Some worried about the economic fallout and the impact on their daily lives, while others voiced strong support for the government's resolve. Many saw the trade halt as a necessary stand for national dignity, and a moment that would define their generation. The trade halt quickly became more than just an economic measure. It was a test of national will, a rallying point for unity, and a defining moment in Japan's modern history. As the world watched, Japan braced itself for the challenges ahead, determined to face them together. Financial markets plunged in the wake of Japan's trade halt. The Nikkei and Dow Jones both suffered historic losses, with automakers and tech giants hit hardest. Gold soared as investors fled to safety, while the yen's surge threatened Japan's exports even further. The US, already weakened by prolonged government shutdown, faced a fog of economic uncertainty. Layoffs surged, and the lack of reliable data fueled panic. President Trump lashed out, threatening more retaliation, while business leaders and lawmakers urged a return to negotiations. The crisis quickly became a domestic political nightmare for the White House. The economic shockwaves were just beginning. The sudden split between the US and Japan sent shockwaves rippling through global supply chains, causing immediate disruptions that hit Southeast Asian economies and manufacturing hubs especially hard. Factories in Vietnam and Thailand, which had long relied on the stability of US-Japan cooperation, faced delays, shortages, and uncertainty. The ripple effects were felt far beyond Asia, as companies worldwide scrambled to adapt to the new reality. European and Five Eyes allies suddenly found themselves at a crossroads. Should they stand in solidarity with Japan, a key democratic partner, or prioritize their own deep economic and security ties with the United States? The diplomatic dilemma played out in tense meetings and urgent phone calls, as leaders weighed the risks of alienating either side. For many, the choice was agonizing. Supporting Japan could mean jeopardizing lucrative American markets, while siding with the US risked undermining the global alliance system that had kept peace for decades. Meanwhile, China wasted no time in seizing the opportunity. Beijing offered to absorb Japanese exports that could no longer reach American shores, promising new trade deals and investment. With bold moves, China expanded its influence across Asia, leveraging the rift to strengthen its Belt and Road Initiative and deepen economic ties with neighbors. The Indo-Pacific security architecture, once anchored by US-Japan cooperation, was suddenly at risk. Regional partners grew anxious as military exercises were scaled back and intelligence sharing slowed. With Beijing poised to benefit from the rift, the balance of power in Asia began to shift. raising fears of a new era of competition and instability. The breakdown also undermined the rules-based global trading system. International institutions like the World Trade Organization struggled to mediate disputes as trust between major economies eroded. In this climate of uncertainty, more nations began to adopt hardline tactics, imposing tariffs, launching trade wars, and using economic leverage as a weapon. Retaliatory measures threatened to fragment the world economy into rival blocs, each with its own rules and standards, making global cooperation more difficult than ever. The era of open, integrated markets, a foundation of global prosperity, was now in jeopardy. Businesses shuttered, investments stalled, and the free flow of goods and people slowed to a crawl. Instability and lower growth loomed for all, as the world faced the prospect of a prolonged period of economic and geopolitical uncertainty. Experts agree, both the US and Japan stand to lose in this standoff. American industries can't quickly replace Japanese components, risking costly shutdowns. Japan's gamble is risky, with doubts about its long-term viability. Trump is unlikely to back down, raising fears of further escalation and even broader sanctions. The conflict damages US credibility, signaling to allies that American partnerships may be unreliable. Industry analysts warn of massive job losses and supply chain breakdowns, especially in autos and tech. The pain will be deep and widespread, far beyond the initial tariff targets. The world watches, hoping for a diplomatic breakthrough. The human cost of the trade war is immediate and personal. Japanese factory workers face layoffs and uncertainty, while American auto workers and small businesses brace for shortages and job losses. Prices for cars, electronics, and everyday goods are set to rise on both sides of the Pacific. Cultural and personal ties, student exchanges, tourism, and collaborations are fraying under the strain. Decades of goodwill risk being replaced by resentment and nationalism. The crisis is measured not just in lost jobs, but in the erosion of a vital international friendship. Ordinary people are paying the price for a conflict they did not choose. The world stands at a crossroads. Japan's trade halt is a historic challenge to the post-war order and US-led alliances. Escalation could trigger a global recession and destabilize the Indo-Pacific. The path forward demands political courage and real diplomacy from both sides. The choices made now will shape the future of international relations and economic cooperation. Will the world descend into economic nationalism, or can trust and cooperation be restored? The coming days will determine the fate of the US-Japan relationship, and the global order itself. The stakes could not be higher.